Chapter 4. A Struggle Between the Stars. A moment there was silence in the pilot room, a silence of sheer surprise, in which my two lieutenants gazed at me in utter amazement, and then from Jules came a great shout. "It's a chance," he cried. "If we can do it, we'll escape yet." "Down to the space door at once then," I told him. "The ship can't last for seconds now." For even then, there had come to our ears another long, cracking roar as our battered walls gave still farther. Now Jules was racing down from the pilot room to assemble the crew, and now our cruiser was slanting still farther down toward the long gleaming oval ship beneath. Down we slanted until our own swaying cruiser hung at a distance of a score of feet above the enemy ship, which, believing us destroyed, never dreamed of our presence as we raced on through space at the same speed as itself. And now Khoruz Khan hastily set the automatic controls in the pilot room that would hold our cruiser at the same speed and course without guiding hand. And then we too hurled ourselves down the narrow stair, through the big power room where the great generators were still throbbing on, down through the succession of compartments in the cruiser's hull, until we had reached the long, low room that lay at its very bottom, and in the floor of which was set the cruiser's lower space door. In the long room, all our crew was gathered now, with Jules at their head, 100-odd in number, and a strange enough aggregation they were, drawn as they were from the far different races of the galaxy's peopled stars. Octopus beings from Vega, great plant men from Capella, spider shapes from Mizar. These and a score or more of differing forms and shapes stood before me, listening in disciplined silence as I briefly explained our plan. About us, the walls were wrenching and cracking fearfully, but when I had finished, those before me raised a fierce shout, and then each of us was hastily climbing into the emergency spacesuits, which were kept always in all interstellar ships in case outside repairs to it were necessary in mid-space. A moment more and we all stood attired in the hermetically sealed, clumsy-looking suits of thick, flexible metal, with headpieces of metal in which were transparent vision plates. As we donned them, each pressed the button which set the little air generators inside each suit, pouring forth their supply of fresh air and purifying the breathed air. And then, with a swift glance around that showed each in his suit, I motioned to Jules and at once the big spike and pressed the stud in the wall that sent the round space door in the floor, sliding open. We could not feel through our insulating suits the tremendous cold that instantly invaded the ship, but we heard plainly the swift, terrific swish of air about us as it rushed out of the ship into the mighty void outside. Now, looking down through the open door, we could see a score of feet beneath the broad metal back of the great oval ship, still racing on unsuspectingly beneath us. I turned back to the crew about me, saw that each had gripped one of the metal bars that were to be our only weapons in this attempt, since the use of rays would destroy the ship beneath, which was our only hope of life. Then, reaching forth again to the switch case on the wall, Jules at my motion threw off the cruiser's gravity control so that the attraction plates built into the floor beneath us, which pulled us always downward and enabled us to walk upright and normally inside the cruiser, no longer pulled us. Instead, though, we were being pulled down now by the gravitational force of the racing ship beneath, and a step through the open door would send any of us hurtling down toward that ship. Now I gave one last glance around, even while the cruiser's walls cracked terribly again, and then swung myself over the edge of the opening in the floor, hanging by my hands from it and swinging there in the infinite void of interstellar space, a score of feet above the oval ship's broad metal back. It seemed, that moment that I swung there, a time of endless length, and surely never before had any hung thus between two ships racing on through the void. Then, as another cracking roar came from the walls about me, I loosed my hold upon the edge and hurtled down through empty space toward the back of the ship below. Down, down. That fall seemed endless as I rushed down through space. But unimpeded as I was by air resistance, it was but an instant before I had slammed down on the ship's broad back, lying motionless for an instant and then rising carefully to a sitting position. Just above me hung our racing cruiser, the opening in its bottom directly overhead, and in another moment, Kurus Khan had followed me, striking the ship's back beside me while I gripped him and held him tightly. Then came one of the crew, and another, until in a moment the last of them was dropping down among us, Chul Din alone remaining above. He stepped toward the opening to lower himself and drop down to us likewise. But even as he did so, I saw the great walls of the cruiser above collapsing and buckling inward as they gave at last. I motioned frantically to Chul Din as the walls collapsed about him, saw him give one startled glance around, and then as the cruiser's sides crumpled up about him, he ran forward and leapt cleanly through the opening in the floor, hurtling down toward us and striking full in our midst, just as the crumpled cruiser above, the power of its generators gone with its collapse, jerked sharply out of sight toward the crimson sun behind, hurtling away from us, a twisted wreck of metal. It was with something of a tightness in my throat that I saw the wreck of our familiar, faithful ship drive away from us. But I turned toward our own desperate situation. We were clinging to the back of the great oval ship as it drove on toward the Cancer cluster, with above and all about us the blackness of the void and the galaxy's flaming suns. Ahead shone the gathered suns of the great cluster, and I knew that we must capture the ship soon if at all. So now, half creeping and half walking, we made our way along the great ship's back toward the round space door set midway along that back. In a moment we were clustered about it and found it closed tightly from within, as I had expected. Instantly, though, we set to work on it with the metal bars and tools we had brought with us, drilling down through the thick metal of the door while we clung, like 100 odd tiny mites, upon the mighty ship's back as it flashed on and on. What might lie in the ship beneath, what manner of beings might these terrible invaders be, we could not even guess. But it was our one chance to penetrate inside, and frantically we worked. Within moments more we had drilled through in a dozen places, were swinging aside the great bolts that held the door closed inside, and then were sliding it open and dropping swiftly down inside. We heard a little rush of air outward as the door opened, and knew that this ship was inhabited by air-breathing beings at least. And then we found ourselves in the room beneath the space door, a bare little vestibule chamber in whose side was a single square door. Before opening this, however, we closed the round space door above us, plugging the holes we had drilled in it by driving in sections of metal bar, and then I turned toward the door in the wall, felt carefully around it, and finally pressed a small white plate inset beside it, at which it slid silently aside. We stepped through it, bars raised ready for action. We were in a corridor, a long corridor apparently running the length of the great oval ship, but quite empty for the moment. The throbbing of great generators was loud in our ears, a throbbing much like that in our own ships, but with another unfamiliar beating sound mingled with it. Silently we gazed about, then began to make our way down the corridor toward the ship's front end, toward the pilot room at its nose, stopping first to divest ourselves silently of the heavy spacesuits and then starting on. Now we had come to an open door in the corridor side, and peering cautiously through it, we saw inside a long room holding a score or more of great cylindrical mechanisms from which arose the throbbing and beating of the oval ship's operation. About these mechanisms were moving some 24 of the ship's occupants, and as our eyes fell upon them, we all but gasped aloud. So utterly strange and alien in shape were they even to us, who held strange shapes enough in our own gathering. Many and many a strange race had we of the patrol seen in our long journeys through the galaxy. But all these were familiar and commonplace beside the shapes that moved in the room before us, for they were serpent people. Serpent people, long, slender shapes of wriggling pale flesh, each perhaps 10 feet in length and a foot in diameter, without arms or legs of any kind, writhing swiftly from place to place snake-like, and coiling an end of their strange bodies about any object which they wished to grip. Each end of the long cylindrical bodies was cut squarely off, as it were, and in one such flat end of each were the only features: a pair of bulging, many-lensed eyes like those of an insect, big and glassy and unwinking, and a small black opening below that was the only orifice for their breathing. These were the beings who had come out of outer space to attack our universe. These were the beings who had annihilated the galaxy's fleet and were preparing now to seize the galaxy itself. I turned from my horror-stricken contemplation of them to Din and Koros Khan, close behind me. "The pilot room," I whispered. "We'll make for it. Get the ship's controls." They nodded silently, and silently we stole past the open door and down the long corridor, toward the door at its end that we knew must lead into the pilot room at the ship's nose. Past other doors we crept, all of them fortunately closed, and as we stole on toward the door at the corridor's end, I began to hope that at last our luck had turned. But ironically, even as I hoped, the door at the corridor's end, not a score of feet ahead, slid suddenly aside, and out of it, out of the pilot room beyond it, came one of the writhing serpent creatures. It stopped short on seeing us, then gave vent to a strange, hissing cry, a high, sibilant call utterly strange to my ears, but at the sound of which the doors all along the corridor behind us slid swiftly open, while through them, scores of the serpent beings writhed out and upon us. "The pilot room!" I yelled, above the sudden hissing cries of the serpent creatures and the shouts of our own crew. "Head for it, Din." Down the corridor we leapt, and out from the pilot room there came to meet us a half dozen of the serpent creatures, while one remained inside at the controls still. Then they were rushing toward us, and as they reached us were coiling about us, endeavoring to crush us by encircling us with their bodies and coiling with terrific power about us. As they did so, though, our own metal bars were crashing down among them, sending them to the corridor's floor in masses of crushed flesh as we plunged on toward the pilot room. Now we were through them, had crushed them before us, and were leaping through the door, the single serpent creature inside wheeling to face us. Before he could spring upon us, though, Din had lifted him high above his head and then had flung him far down the corridor, where he struck against the wall and fell crushed to the floor. Then Koros Khan was leaping to the controls, swiftly scanning them and then twisting and shifting them, heading the racing ship around in a great curve, away from the cancer cluster ahead and back in toward the galaxy center, while Din and I now sprang back down the corridor to where our crew was struggling fiercely with the hordes of serpent creatures rushing up from all parts of the ship. Down that corridor and down another, through rooms and halls and twisting stairways, down through all the great ship the battle raged, the serpent creatures leaping and coiling about us with the courage of despair while we strode among them, metal bars smashing down in great strokes, mowing them down before us. Despite their overpowering numbers, they were no match for us in such hand-to-hand fighting, and they dared not use ray tubes, like ourselves, lest they destroy their own ship about them. So we forced them on, ever sending them down in crushed, lifeless masses as they gradually gave way before us. I will not tell all that happened in that red time of destruction, but quarter there could be none for these things that had come to attack our universe, that had destroyed our comrades' ships in thousands. And so within a half hour more, the last of the serpent creatures had perished, and we were masters of the ship, though but a scant 200 of us were left to operate it. So fierce had been the battle. Our first action was to clear the ship of dead, casting them loose into space through the space doors. Then Din and I made our way back into the pilot room, where Koros Khan was holding the ship to a course inward into the galaxy. The controls he had found were very much like those of our own cruisers, but the great generators, as we found, were much different. Instead of setting up a vibration in the ether to fling the ship forward, as in our own cruisers, they projected a force which caused a shifting of the ether itself about the ship, forming a small, ceaseless ether current, which moved at colossal speed, bearing the ship with it. The speed could thus be raised or lowered at will by controlling the amount of force projected. And as the general nature of the generators was clear enough, the remaining engineers of our crew took charge of them while we fled on into the galaxy. "We'll head straight for Canopus," I said, indicating the great white star at the galaxy's center far ahead. will report at once to the Council of Suns. Our capture of this ship may be of use to them." While I spoke, Chorus Khan had opened the power control wider, and now our newly captured prize was racing through the void toward the mighty central white sun at thousands upon thousands of light speeds. Though I knew that even this terrific velocity, all that we dared use inside the galaxy, was but a fraction of what the ship was capable of in outer space. Glancing about the pilot room, I endeavored for a time to penetrate the purpose of some of the things about me as we flashed on. Above our window, as in our own cruiser, was a great space chart, functioning similar to ours, I had no doubt, and showing the dot that was our ship flashing on between the sun circles that lay about us. There was a device for flashing vari-colored signals, also such as spaceships inside the galaxy used to show their identity on landing. There was, too, a cabinet containing a great mass of rolls of thin, flexible metal, inscribed with strange, precise little characters that I guessed formed the written language of the serpent people, though they were beyond all comprehension to me. I turned back to the windows about me, gazing forth into the vista of thronging suns and worlds that lay all about us now as we flashed on into the galaxy toward Canopus. From all the suns about us, our space chart showed great masses of interstellar ships were also flashing inward into the galaxy. The first exodus of the galaxy's people from the outer suns and worlds, driven inward by the fear of these mighty invaders from the outer void, who had already destroyed the galaxy's fleet and were preparing now to grasp all our universe. Far behind us, I could see the great ball of suns that was the Cancer Cluster, glowing in supreme splendor at the galaxy's edge. And I knew that even now, on the worlds of those thronging suns, the great fleet of the invading serpent creatures would be settling, would be moving to and fro, wiping out the races that thronged those worlds, wrecking and annihilating the civilizations upon them, and making of all the suns and worlds of the great cluster a base for their future attacks upon and conquest of the galaxy. Could we, in any way, save ourselves from that conquest? It seemed hopeless, and now, weary as we were with crushing fatigue from the swift succession of events that had crowded upon us in the last few hours, since our discovery of the invading swarm's approach, it was with a dull despair that I watched Canopus enlarging ahead as we flashed on toward it. On between the galaxy's thronging suns we raced, our vast speed carrying us through them and through the swarming, panic-driven ships about them before they could glimpse us. Onward, inward, we flashed, veering here and there to avoid some stars' far-swinging planets, dipping or rising to keep clear of the masses of traffic that were jamming the space lanes leading inward, racing on at the same unvarying tremendous velocity, while we three in the pilot room and the remainder of our crew beneath strove to remain awake and conscious against the utterly crushing oppression of fatigue that pressed down upon us. At last, we were flashing past the last of the suns between us and Canopus, and the great white central sun lay full before us, a gigantic globe of blazing, brilliant light. As we leapt toward it, I saw Chorus Khan gradually decreasing our speed, our ship slackening in its tremendous flight as we slanted down toward the planets of the great sun and toward the inmost planet that was the center of the galaxy's government. Down, down, our speed was dropping by hundreds of light speeds each moment, now as we sped down through the terrific glare of the vast white sun toward its inmost world. As we shot downward, I saw that Chul Din now was lying on the floor beside me, overcome by the fatigue that crowded down upon me also. Only Chorus Khan, of all of us, holding to the controls untiring and unaffected, the metal body in which his living organs and intelligence were cased being untrammeled by any weariness. Beneath us now lay the great masses of traffic, countless swarms of swirling ships that had fled into Canopus from the outer suns at the invaders' attack, and as they glimpsed our great oval craft, these swarms broke wildly from before us. They took us for a raiding enemy ship, we knew, but down between them, unheedingly, we flashed, heading low across the surface of the great planet, still at tremendous speed. Moments more and there loomed far ahead and beneath the colossal tower of the Council of Suns, toward which we were heading. By then I felt all consciousness and volition beginning to leave me, as an utter drowsy weariness overcame me, and I realized, but dimly, that Chorus Khan was slanting the ship down toward the great tower, until abruptly there came from him a sharp cry. With an effort, I raised my gaze and saw that from below, as we sped downward, 3 long, shining shapes were arrowing up to meet us. They were cruisers of our own interstellar patrol, and as they flashed upward, there suddenly leapt from them a half-dozen brilliant shafts of the crimson rays of death, stabbing straight toward us.